Few now remember them, Tom murmured. Yet still some go wandering, sons of forgotten kings walking in loneliness, guarding from evil things folk that are heedless. In those days, no other men had settled dwellings so far west, or within 100 leagues of the Shire, but in the wild lands beyond Bree there were mysterious wanderers. The Bree folk called them Rangers, and knew nothing of their origin. They were taller and darker than the men of Bree, and were believed to have strange powers of sight and hearing, and to understand the languages of beasts and birds. My Gavan Melonin, and well met indeed. I'm Arachir Galadirthan, head of the modding team behind Divide and Conquer, and welcome to the Northern Dúnedain version 4.5 faction overview, one of the most requested faction overviews. I have, this time again, studied what has actually gone into it in a hope to actually make these faction overviews correct, although there were a couple of things on the High Elves one I did get wrong, chiefly when the twins spawn. They don't just spawn for no reason. You have to send a diplomat to the fortress of Amun-Sul, and then they will spawn. So that was the main thing. But this time I'm hoping to have it all down, to be honest. Apart from one thing, which we'll get to in a moment. But let's dive straight in without any ado-ing, or more ado-ing. Starting with your starting size. The Northern Dúnedain are one of the smallest factions in the game at the game start for the human player. You start with your capital of Fenestreinen, which is only a village. You will note there are no walls in this place. And you also start with Ostsul, also a village. That is it for town. So you've only got 2, which is quite a small amount, let's be honest. In terms of army size, the picture doesn't get any brighter. Aragorn starts with your first tier Dúnedain units. So he's got Rangers and he's got Wardens, and they're in Fenestreinen with him. In Ostsul, you have Arafor, and he's got 2 units of Cardlan Sentinels. They come from Cardlan proper, which is a nice thing to know. Over here in the fort between Fornoserain, which is currently called Dead Man's Dyke, and it renames itself to Fornost, I think, or you have to, can't remember, but it's Dead Man's Dyke at the moment. And Anuminas, which is over there. Oh, sorry, hang on, I've not toggled Fog of War. Anuminas, which is over there, and Dead Man's Dyke, which is over there. Starting in the fort between them is Hervigil, and he has 2 units of Dúnedain Wardens and 2 units of Arthedain Footmen, which is a very good unit in the early stages of the game. So a reasonable force, but we'll get on to the rebels in just a moment. The reasonableness may be not as reasonable as one first thinks. And then finally, Halbarad of the North, one of the only named Dúnedain, aside from Aragorn and his son. He starts down here at the Sarn Ford with 2 units of Dúnedain Rangers, ready to head south if you wish him to, or indeed just keep the Breelanders safe, if that's your plan. So, very small starting size, very small army starting size. Turning to the family tree, as we've just mentioned, there's a lot of dead people, but we start with Chieftain Aragorn, who's your faction leader, at 38 years of age. So he will live for quite a while, because they die at 150, and that is what, 60, 50, 110, 4. He's got about 400 turns in him before he dies, so really no one ever dies of old age, let's be honest. Apart from the very few people who are actually set to be old at the start. But his son is already born and is the heir, Ranger Captain Eldarion. You'll note, of course, you don't have control over Ranger Captain Eldarion, so keeping Aragorn alive is really, really important. You are very easily killed by regicide as a human player. The AI tends to... I've never known the Northern Dúnedain be killed by regicide. And I think, actually, the fact that your heir can't be killed is actually a benefit, because as long as there's someone else in your tree, your heir is always secure. But note that we've married Halbarad to Darla, who is the fictitious daughter of Norrisel, who is the fictitious sister of Arathorn, which, of course, is all fictitious. I've made that up. The whole thing's made up, but you understand what I mean. Arathorn didn't actually have a sister, but we've given him one so that Halbarad can get into the family tree. Which is good. So Halbarad is married to the cousin of Aragorn. And there is Arwen as Aragorn's wife, as one would hope. Oh, I don't know who Larwen is. Of course, we have to make up all the women's names, don't we? And there's Arador at the top. Note that in order for the Northern Dúnedain to have unique portraits, you have to have this symbol for when people die, which is just a generic gravestone. Turning lastly then to the custom generals, Aragorn has a custom general, so he will always sound like Aragorn on the battlefield. He has the Grey Company, and we will discuss them more in the second half of the video. But do note, they don't have any arrows. He is a purely foot melee infantry unit, which lots of people will complain about, and they have done many times before, and they will do in this video too. But we are unmoved on the position and the request to change him back to something else. He's going to remain as a really strong elite foot unit. Dúnedain bodyguards for Arafor. I believe Dúnedain bodyguards for everyone else, because the Dúnedain bodyguard is a fantastic bodyguard. But, oh no, Halbarad has steel bowmen, so he's a very useful general, but quite a costly one at 450. But that's a really good archer unit, so do be sure to use Halbarad. And then it's Dúnedain bodyguards again for Hervagil in the fort in the north. And those are all of your generals. Those are the 4 that you start with. Just before we move on to the next section, because I completely forgot to mention him, I had to come back and edit it in, Gandalf also fights for the Dúnedain. So I'm talking about this now before we get to the gameplay events, because it's obviously relatively minor, and lots of you will ask, why is Gandalf not listed in the generals? So Gandalf will spawn for you at turn 55. He spawns as Gandalf the Grey. He then gets the ring from Círdan. So if you're playing as the High Elves, at turn 55, Círdan will give Gandalf his ring. Although, of course, really, he gave the ring to him thousands of years ago. It just added a nice little gameplay effect. So Gandalf the Grey will spawn. He has Dúnedain Cavalry as his bodyguard, as you'll see in the second half of the video. And then once he dies, he will come back as Gandalf the White. And he will come back with Arthedain Royal Guard as his bodyguard, which is a very, very good unit. So lots of people do tend to get Gandalf killed off just so they can get the better version. But of course, note that you can be a bit blasé with him when he's grey, because you know you're going to get a better one when he dies anyway. So it's better to use him and actually get him to do things, rather than just kill him off for the better bodyguard, because the Dúnedain Cavalry are a fantastic bodyguard, particularly for a general to have, because obviously they will respawn. So he is very useful, and he spawns around the angle, so he'll spawn around here. And as I say, he comes at turn 55. So turning then to the area that you're in, of course, there's no geographical defences really for the Dúnedain, apart from if you're defending at Fennes-Druin, and then of course you can use the line of the Bruinen River, which is the southern one here. You can use the line there because the only crossing is just there. If I show you with Aragorn, you can cross there and you can cross up there. And coming in from the left, you can only get across there. And the next nearest crossing is all the way up in the Ruadar uplands, which is this region here, which we shall come back to in a moment. So Fennes-Druin is relatively defended by the course of the Bruinen from the Orcs. But remember, they can go south and they can cross into the Tirthuin region. And then they'll almost certainly try and take that if you beat them to it. You've got Coloniac to the south, which also governs a river crossing. But the Bruinen does give you defensive points against Moria, who will likely be one of your chief opponents. Otherwise, there's no, as I say, there's no, you're in an open space, so there's nothing really else you can rely on. Turning to rebels then, and where can you go? Well, as I say, you've got Dead Man's Dyke and you've got Annúminas. Both are very important, and both are almost crucial to Northern Dúnedain's success and survival. And both have quite large garrisons. Well, they're not that large, as you've seen. It's not even half a banner army, but the troops within them are quite impressive. So they can be quite difficult to take, depending on... Or they can be quite difficult to take if you try and take both. So Annúminas has got some sellswords, 2 units of hunters, and 3 lumbermen. So it's a weak force, really, but given your force is quite small, you've got to be tactical in how you play it. Dead Man's Dyke, on the other hand, has trolls and a unit of Barrow-wights. Dead Man's Dyke is much harder to take, and it'll be a real test of your skill to try and take both, because you'll be up against it to do so. You can, of course, take both. You've got enough time before Angmar arrive, but you have got to be cautious that you might lose all of your forces in the Dyke, so it may be better and prudent to go for Annúminas first. In the south, as already mentioned, you've got Tirthuin and you've got Coloniac. Other than that, though, you're bumping into Dunlin down at Tharbad. Matraith is available and Halbarad is there. He could go for that. Mengelin is always an option, of course, but you want to try and upgrade that quickly to stop the Barrow-wight attacks. And there's all these regions in the north as well. Camath Bryn is free, Morva Tarth is free, and Knockfarachlor is free. But Morva Tarth will almost... Oh no, sorry, that's Angmarim. Ignore me, sorry. Camath Bryn and Knockfarachlor. But Raglor will almost certainly get taken straight away. Angmar will be very hot on the heels of taking that one, particularly starting with Morva Tarth. And with the change, of course, for version 4, that Mount Graham is now a north-south crossing of the spur of the Misty Mountains. Angmar can get out of Angmar easier, so Morva Tarth is easier for them to defend than it was before. Custom battle maps. Fenestruen is not a custom battle map. Well, I mean, it technically is. All northern Dúnedain villages, which are the ones with the little green tents, they are actually custom battle maps in that they've been modified from the generic vanilla settlement, but they are still, they all are, of course, the same, so there's more than one of them. But Fenestruen is a standard Dúnedain village, which means it's just a village layout with tents instead of buildings. Ostsul has a unique feature in that whilst it is a village, the battle map is the fort of Amun-Sul. So if it's attacked when it's a village, the scouts of the Dúnedain warn the inhabitants of the village, which of course they all live in tents, so they're easily moved. They all hop up and jump over to Amun-Sul where they hope to defend. However, once they've built a wall around the town and they've upgraded it to be a town, you no longer fight in Amun-Sul. But whilst it's a village, the battle map is actually Amun-Sul. So it's quite useful. Amun-Sul, of course, now is just a fort. It starts in your control. You can put 4 units in it as any fort, and it is always the battle map of Amun-Sul whenever you fight there. Dead Man's Dyke, of course, is a custom battle map as well. And starts ruined, and then you as the Dúnedain can upgrade it, and it'll be upgraded. The battle map looks, I've shown you the battle map many times if you've followed the channel in the past sort of few months, but it looks very much like it does on the campaign map. Numinas also starts ruined and then upgrades to be fixed as well, and again looks very much like that on the battle map with the square up in the fortress at the back, so there's quite a lengthy journey for any would-be assailants. Otherwise, though, the only other real custom battle map in the area other than the Misty Mountains is Mengelen and Bree. I showed off Mengelen in the last developer diary, number 28, I think, and Bree has been a custom settlement since, I think, Third Age Total War, so that just continues. Neighbours and diplomacy, then. Turning to diplomacy first. Your allies are Bree and the High Elves, as you might expect, but you're not allied to the Dwarves of Ered Luin, so watch out for that, I suppose, that they could scupper your plans, but they are quite far away. You're not allied to, obviously, Enedwaith or anyone like that. There are, in fact, no other allies other than Ered Luin that you could be allied to in Eriador, so it is as expected. And in terms of enemies, you don't start at war with Dunland or Enedwaith, but you are at war with Moria and Angmar. Moria being the more pertinent assailant, because they'll be on your doorstep before you know where you are. Angmar, a little less so. They tend to go considerably more on the west and sort of southern front here, so they will attack you, particularly in Dead Man's Dyke or Numinas, but they don't tend to really come to Fenestruen and south of here, but they might make it to Ostsul. But as I say, your main threat for much of the early game, and indeed much of the game, is Moria, who will throw a lot at you. They want everything that you've got. And by that I mean they want the river crossings, they want to get across. They need troops and they need forces because their fight in the east is often one that they don't usually win. They constantly throw units at Imladris and never really take it. And whereas you represent a wealthy and fertile region for them to claim. So Moria will be on you before you know where you are. Watch out for that. Turning then to economy, buildings and diplomat ships, and advanced blacksmith. Quite the mouthful. We have, going to the building browser, we'll start with the ships. I think you are a nation that gets ships. Yes, you do. You'll get the same tier ships that Gondor and Dol Amroth do. So you do get boats if you ever get over to a port, which is good to know. You do also get an advanced blacksmith, but like you can only build it in a region that is held by a nation who you would consider better than yourself at blacksmithing, or just a large sort of major dwelling. So by that, you can definitely get it in the Khazad-dûms. You'd get it if you got Imladris, for example. You won't get it in Tharbad, because Tharbad is your own city. You're not going to learn anything new from your own people. Likewise, you don't get it in Numinas or Dead Man's Dyke, because they are your regions. You'd need to get somewhere like Mithlond, the Dwarven regions. As I say, the Khazad-dûms, Lothlorien, probably Isengard, I expect, Dol Guldur, Barad-dûr. But you wouldn't get it in your own regions. I've seen a lot of people suggesting Tharbad should get it, and I'm not really sure why. I don't think I know I contradict myself a lot on the channel, because I've got a terrible memory, but I don't think I've ever said Tharbad does get it. But if you look at the changelog, which is linked in the installation video, which can easily be found on the channel, because I'll forget to put it in this video. But if I don't forget, it'll be in the description. Otherwise, it's on the installation video. If you look at the changelog, it tells you where the advanced blacksmiths are buildable by each faction. So do go and have a look at that. But we get the advanced blacksmith is the point to make. The Dúnedain are not restricted in any way, so you get all the way up to a large city, and you get all the way to Stronghold if you go down the castle route. Do note you can also, of course, get Fortress and Citadel, but those are unique and restricted, because those are Dead Man's Dyke and a Numinas. So I think a Numinas is a city to start. Yes, so a Numinas is your city slot used up, or your huge city slot used up. And Dead Man's Dyke is your fortress slot used up. And then the last slot at the moment that you can upgrade is one of the Osgiliaths. I think, because Tharbad, we haven't implemented Tharbad properly yet. So I'm fairly certain for the Dúnedain, it's Dead Man's Dyke, it's a Numinas, and then it is the Osgiliath, which is a castle. So that one. Western Osgiliath you can upgrade, but I don't think you can upgrade Eastern. No, you can't, because it would look like a Numinas upgraded. So those are the Dúnedain upgrade locations, which will be a bit of a pain if you do go all the way down to Gondor, and it'll be discussed in the future with the Reunited Kingdom. Returning then to guilds and things, you get the Warriors Guild, as all good nations generally do. Swordmasters, Royal Swordmasters, Hall of the Faithful. The Hall of the Faithful also giving you Arthurdine Knights, and it's just a melee weapon and a morale bonus, as the Swordsmith Guilds are for everyone. You also get the Archers Guild, which, like the other nations, just speeds up the replenishment of any of your archers within the region you build it, and it also gives you Sworn Infantry and Dúnedain Steel Bowmen from the location. So that gives you possibly one extra location where you might get Dúnedain Steel Bowmen if you get the Grey Company Guild Hall, and Sworn Infantry just as an extra buff in the Royal Rangers Guild. It means you can get Sworn Infantry either locations where generally you wouldn't get them, or you can just get them at twice the speed. You also get the Horse Breeders Guild, but for you, it speeds up your horse replenishment and gives you Sworn Horsemen in the second tier, the Master Horse Breeders Guild. But you don't get the third tier. Right, otherwise, Downs. What is Downs? Oh yeah, you can upgrade the crypts in the Barrowdowns, that's no trouble. You get to rebuild the Tharbad Bridge, which of course gives you Tharbad Royal Guard once you take Tharbad. Otherwise though, in terms of economy, you can make good money because you get all of the possible buildings, but do note something I should have been warning in all of the version 4 videos. Corruption and governors play a massive part in Divide and Conquer version 4.5, where they did not before. And now, the only way to really make thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands is either playing as a faction that gets dirt cheap infantry like Ennard Wythe, or really utilising your governors. Governors are now so important in making money, that was done on purpose, but I suppose it's something that we've not possibly publicised enough. But a governor will really restrict your corruption, which is now considerably worse than it was before, because the economy was out of control in the previous version and we needed to rein it in. And with Rohan on board and all of his trait and ancillary skills, it seemed the best way to go about it was to make, it's early in the morning, make the governors better. So we did. So governors are really important. You want to try and maintain governors in your cities. I mean, Furnace Druin is a basic example. Aragorn has acumen of 8 points, which is fantastic for a governor. And he increases the income in there by 200 coins alone, which is not too shabby. I should say, I think Aragorn is free for his upkeep, by the way, because you can't train his unit. Yeah, so him as a governor is actually really useful, but he's a very good general, so it's using your mind. But in order to make real money, you've got to really actually work at your economy now. It's no longer good enough to just build economy buildings and think, oh, that'll do. If you want to actually make enough money to really sustain sizable armies, you will need governors. Do note one little odd side effect that we recently realised is devastation has also been made worse in version 4.5. So if an enemy army is in your region, it's really going to impact your income. However, having a governor in a region where there is devastation often actually worsens your income, because the governor increases the income you get from farms and taxes and everything. So because there's an extra, say, 500 gold coins on board, and devastation is a percentage, that's an extra sort of 200 taken from the devastation. So it may well seem as though adding a governor actually worsens your position, because the devastation, the accrual to devastation is worse than the extra money you gain from the governor. So it can be a bit bizarre, so that's something to watch out for. Just try not to ever let enemies stand in your regions, really. The longer an enemy stands in your region, the greater and greater and greater the devastation becomes. The greater the percentage loss you lose. So it's worthwhile trying to shut down rebels and any invading armies. But that's a point about all factions. I'm just talking about it in the Dúnedain one. Then we move on to gameplay events, because I think that's all of the buildings covered, isn't it? We covered everything pretty much there, didn't we? Yeah, Master Builders obviously are much better than they were before. Do note that the Dúnedain have the Wildmen theme UI, as you are seeing at the moment. But as you can see with certain buildings, once you get to a certain point, they swap out. I'm using terrible examples. They swap out and they become Dúnedain buildings. So if the icon is a Dúnedain icon, that's a Wild Men building that only you get. So, for example, because you share the same UI set with Dunland, Anduin, and Ennard Wythe, in case you are interested. But as I say, once you get past a certain point, you have your own UI showing your changeover to Gondorian. Also note, something I should have mentioned, on the strategy map, Tharbad's a good example, your cities do look like Gondorian, or rather Arnorian, cities on the battle map. Now, the only difference between Arnorian and Gondorian is the Gondor battle maps all have the very, very blue tiles. I don't think their strategy maps show it. No, they don't. But on their battle map, the rooftops are all like bright blue tiling, as many of you will know. And the Arnorian ones, the rooftops are all grey tiling, and that's about the only difference. But also, the Arnorian ones have these tall towers, which the Gondor ones don't do. So it's a few minor changes, but nothing really. But do note, as I say, you have your own strategy models reflecting the rebuilding of Arnor, and your battle maps are just as good as well. The village is the only one that is Dúnedain heritage based, if you will. So then we can turn on to gameplay and sort of any scripts that affect you. Now, of course, there are two huge features for Aragorn and for the Dúnedain, the greater Dúnedain in general. I'll start with the Aragorn script because at the moment we've not included anywhere a little breakdown of how it works, which is something that we will do in future versions, and it won't actually be on Aragorn. In the next version we will have all of the green books completed, so it will say here how all of your scripts for each faction work. We just didn't get around to it for 4.5, and we wanted to get the game out rather than delaying to write all of those. We'd written about 6 of them, I think, and we didn't do the rest. But in future versions you'll be able to read about every faction scripts in the green book of your capital only. So Enegladil, the Angle, that's Sindarin for the Angle, that is where we are at the moment. That would explain all the Dúnedain scripts. But starting with Aragorn's then, the only thing, as I said at the beginning, that I've not written down is the turn number that this begins on. But I think it's about turn 5 or 7 or something like that. But anyway, what you need to do in the Aragorn script is very simple. The first thing that you will need to do is send Aragorn to Bree. And to send him to Bree, you don't have to actually send him to Bree, you just have to send him to the Bree region. And he has to stay in it for 1 turn. Then you will get a message to say, go and find Gollum. Gollum is in the Rhuideau Uplands region, although I edited that this morning because your messages will all say he's in the hills of Rhuideau region, which, as you scan around here, does not actually exist. So I had to amend that, so that's a bug in all of your games. But it's this region you send him to, Camath Bryn or Rhuideau Uplands. And all you have to do is send him to the region. So once you've sent him to Bree, you'll get a historic message pop up. That's the name of the events. You'll get an event pop up that says, right, you were looking for Gandalf. Gandalf wasn't there, but he's sent you out to try and find Gollum. Go to the Rhuideau Uplands region where he was last seen. So you head over here. You stand in there for a turn. And then you'll get a message saying, Gollum has buggered off. We can't find him. His tracks lead south. I should go and see if Gandalf's back in Bree and discuss this with him. Then you go back over to Bree. Then you have to stay in Bree for 1 turn. And then it will say, maybe now's the time to go and reforge Narsil and get the ball rolling about perhaps reforging the kingdom. And so you think, yeah, brilliant idea. So you send Aragorn over to Imladris. Once you are in Imladris, you have to stay there for 2 turns. It does say this all in the message, but lots of people do skip through them. But you have to stay in Imladris for 2 turns, and then you'll get a message saying, now that we've reforged Narsil, go and discuss the general future of the faction with the rest of your Dúnedain kin. Head over to the Weather Hills where you will find them. Then you have to head over to the Weather Hills, and you stand in this region for a turn. And then it's decided that in order to save the world and all the free peoples, you will need the army of the dead, and it is time to go and get them. And so Aragorn, and as many troops as you want, and ideally you'll need a few because he's got to go a long way, Aragorn then has to go all the way south, cross the Gwathlo, past Tharbad, through Dunland's heartlands, through Isengard's heartlands, into what is probably then at that time going to be Isengard's extended heartlands, and stand in the King's Land. Now the King's Land is this large region here. And again, you only have to stand in it. You don't have to go all the way to Dunharrow, but the message does say go to Dunharrow. But you don't actually have to do that. You just have to get to the King's Land, so you could stand him over there and just wait. It doesn't make any odds. Once he is in that region, then the script will end and you will get the Army of the Dead. Now, the Army of the Dead in version 4.5 is 1 unit. The King of the Dead and his bodyguard. So you get a new general called the King of the Dead with a King of the Dead portrait, and his bodyguard are Oathbreakers. They will fight in 3 battles and then they will abandon you. And those 3 battles are any battles. So if you are accidentally ambushed by a pathetic force of like 1 snagger, you've wasted one of your battle slots. So you really need to keep the king safe and not throw him away on useless battles. Because it goes without saying, the Oathbreakers are nigh on unstoppable. And about the only units in the game that could actually damage them, I think, are catapults, because of a sort of quirk in the game engine. The Balrog and Ents probably would do some damage if you fought against Ents. But on the whole, the Oathbreakers could take on an entire 20 banner orc army and win without taking a single loss. The only thing that really kills them is catapults, as I say, because of the quirk in the engine. They have like 25 hit points. They have about 60 on their defense. Their attack is ridiculously high. Like, they are just unstoppable. Stamina would probably let them down, and they might start losing things. But they're really powerful. But they only fight in 3 battles, so you really have to be careful. And it doesn't matter, as I say, it doesn't matter what those battles are, so just watch out. But that is how you get them. And, spoiler alert, for the Reunited Kingdom, it will almost certainly be a requirement for the Northern Dúnedain to reforge it for you to have completed the Aragorn Script. So if you're in it for the Reunited Kingdom in version 5, then get acquainted with the Aragorn Script so that you're ready to go when the ball rolls. So that's Aragorn Script. And as I say, at the moment, there's nowhere in the game that you can read about that. You just have to pay attention when the pop-ups pop up and read them and find out where you need to go next. I think it does show you an arrow, but it only does it once and then it disappears. So it's on you to remember. But there you go, I've explained it to you. The other thing for the Dúnedain, of course, is the Beacon of Hope system, which has been changed to be a mercenary system moving forward. Oh, and I will discuss Dúnedain recruitment after this as well. It's kind of bundled into this, really. But the Beacon of Hope system allows you to recruit troops from all the other human factions in the world, and it is every single human faction, including the Ardennaim, and it lets you train their units depending on a certain number of, whether a certain number of triggers have been met. And if those triggers have been met, you train them as mercenary units. So, hopefully an example for this, although I don't know if they'll be here on turn 1, is Arafor can train. There we are, look, he's showing it off perfectly for me. And people are telling me that this is worse than the previous system, and it boils my blood, because it's just not at all. Previously, if I wanted Bree's troops, I'd have to capture Bree. Right, we are at turn 2, and I can, if I want, train 2 Breelandish militia units and get them in my army. And boom, there we go, I've got Bree troops. It was that simple and that straightforward. I didn't have to backstab my own ally in order to claim their troops. But anyway, rant over. There are certain triggers, and they are broken down into 3 groups. So there are 3 factions where you can always get their troops. There are 4 factions that you have to defeat before you can train their troops. And then all the other factions you must not be at war with. And I will go through these. So the first group, those that you can train anytime, no matter if you're at war with them, if they're defeated, if you're allied, it doesn't matter. You can train them no matter what. And they are Enedwaith, Dunland, and Cand. Cand, of course, you're very unlikely to ever make it to Cand. But if you do, you get their troops for no reason. But Enedwaith and Dunland you will see a lot of. The point of this is because those forces are so sort of on the fence and so easily corrupted, or they're malleable. Their brains are malleable. And Aragorn is the king of the Reunited Kingdom. He would be able to tell these people to stop fighting for the bad people, basically, and fight for him. Particularly the Enedwaithians, because they're neutral anyway. So a strong army walking through and saying, come on, join us. It works. And the Dunlendings, of course, have only really been riled up by the skill of Saruman, so Aragorn is just countering that. So those 2 nations, you can train their troops at any time, and can. It doesn't matter what the status of them is. The following nations, Bree, Rohan, Dale, the Anduin, Dorwinion, and Gondor and Dol Amroth, you can train their troops through the mercenary system as long as you are not at war with them. So you can be neutral and still get their troops. Do note that Gondor and Dol Amroth come as one, though. So if I go to war with Dol Amroth, I can no longer train Gondor troops and vice versa. You have to be neutral or allied to both in order to get either of their troops. All of the others, as I say, you just can't be at war with them. And that was why, obviously, I can train Breeze forces straight away because I'm allied at the moment. But even if I were neutral, I could still train them. Lastly, the final category, the nations that must be defeated. Now, 3 of these you'll very unlikely come across, but 1 will be right up in your grill early doors. These are the Arnor, Harad, and Rune, and Angmar. So you can only train Angmarim, Arnor, Runic, and Haradrim forces if the nation has been defeated. Because even Aragorn's best strength and best command, he's not going to be able to turn them against, at the moment, Sauron or his will. Whereas if he can wipe them out, then the remaining forces will think, oh, hang on, actually, perhaps Sauron isn't all he's meant to be, and this Aragorn guy really is the future of our nation. So you can get those troops. But do note, Angmar, if you defeat Angmar, you can only train the Ruadauer units anyway. So they don't actually let you train all of their troops, you only get the Ruadauer units. And they don't come through the mercenary system either. So in Angmar, once you've defeated Angmar, you can then train Ruadauer troops either... I think it's either from a unique Ruadauer barracks, which won't show because the script hasn't kicked in. No, I think they just come from your standard barracks, which is called... I don't know, actually. Encampment, there we are. So they come from the encampment once you can get Ruadauer units, but you have to defeat Angmar to do it. So this bit's going to be a bit boring, but I'm just going to quickly list for you the troops you get, because you don't get everything from every nation. You only actually get about 3 or 4 units from each nation. And we will just go through them, because why not? So from Bree, you get Breeland Militia, you get Archer Militia, and you get Journeyman, the early tier crossbow unit. If you make it to Rohan, you get their Peasant Militia, you get Rohirrim Archers, and you get Ered Lancers. So you get 3 really solid cavalry units and a quick Peasant Militia unit to help you as well. If you make it to the Anduin, you get Valesmen, which are their very good defender unit. You get Woodman Trackers, Bjorning Warriors, and again Eothed Horse Archers. So again, another horse unit and a spattering of their more iconic units. If you make it over to Dale, you can get Northmen Militia, Dalian Billmen, Dalian Longbowmen, and Barding Marksmen. So a more archery focus with 50% of them being archers. But you get the Billmen as well, which is quite nice. Something that you'll be noting with all of these units is they are relatively early to mid-tier. You don't really get any elite units, apart from when we get to Gondor and Dol Amroth. But next up, moving to Dorwinion. If you get to Dorwinion, then you'll be able to train Vineyard Levies, Thorn Bladesmen, Thorn Crossbowmen, and Regent Spear Guard, which is a good solid spear unit, so that one will be helpful. And then lastly, Gondor and Dol Amroth, you do get pretty much almost all of their rosters, and they don't train as mercenaries either. So Angmar, Gondor, and Dol Amroth don't come as mercenaries, they do come from your barracks. Because, of course, you are Dúnedain. Coming into Gondor or Dol Amroth, you'd be freeing the people. But not only that, they are kind of your own people. You're returning as their king. So their troops, you just train from the barracks. And you do just get pretty much most of, if not all of their rosters. You can check it in the custom battle. It isn't their entire roster, but you do get a lot of units from Gondor and Dol Amroth. So once you get down here, you can build a whole army of Gondorian troops, really. Whereas you'd struggle to do that with the others. The always available nations then, so in Enedwaith and Dunnan, the 2 you're going to get to closest, Enedwaith give you their Hunters, which is an early tier archer, Grey Flood Raiders, a good javelin unit, River Archers, and River Elders, so a medium tier archer and spear. In Dunland you get Clan Axemen, Dunlending Berserkers, Dunlending Horsemen, and Wolf's Pikes, so you get a really good pike unit from Dunland as well, which is really helpful. And that one is a good one to get. And lastly, of course, Khand, the other nation you can get all the time. They give you Steppe Tribesmen, Nomad Horsemen, Khandish Raiders, which are the mounted archers, and Variag Horse Archers. So again, 3 cavalry units from Khand, 2 of which are horse archers, which is useful. And lastly, the defeated nations. If you take the Ardenaim out of the game, you get Azrazair Raiders, Rosadan Halberdiers, Azrazair Crossbowmen, and Abrazanim Nardutarek, which I believe are the armor-piercing defensive sort of mid-tier unit. So that one's a really useful one. But otherwise you get 3 sort of early-tier units from the AA. From Harad, you get Haradrim Spearmen, Southron Warband, Southron Archers, and Trollmen Warriors. So the Trollmen are quite good, but the other 3 are just sort of filler trash. And lastly, from Rune, you get Daratai Clansmen, so early-tier trash, Balkoth Spearmen, early tier trash. Arelad Dragon Riders, which are quite a useful early cavalry unit. But most importantly, you get Udej Marines, which are the fire bomb throwing Marines from Lest, which are a fantastic unit. So those are the units that you can actually get. Now, where you can get them is pretty much the heartlands of each region. So Bree, for example, you can only train Bree units in the Bree region. So they only come from there. The Ruidour units, as I say, come from your own barracks in the Ruidour area. So they'll be sort of everything that's on screen at the moment. And otherwise, it's just all of their heartlands. So Dunland, it's the 3 main Dunland regions, sorry. Enadwaith is pretty much just what you can see on the screen there. Rohan is pretty much everything that's Rohan have at the moment. It follows that pattern. Gondor and Dol Amroth allow you to train all their troops, obviously, in all of Gondor and Dol Amroth, so that's a bit freer. But all the others, again, it's just Heartland. So the Ardenaim is only Khaldun, Ardamir, and Umbar, and likewise Harad is Harad. You get the picture. So they come from their Heartlands only. But now you can train them by just passing a general through. You no longer have to actually capture them. So if you want to support Rohan and you want to use some of Rohan's own forces in the fight, you don't have to actually capture Rohan's own territories. Of course, if Isengard have them, then you can. But instead, you can get a general into, say, Entwade, which Rohan might still have. Get some Rohan units in your army. Send a general into Aldburg, get some more Rohan units, and then head out. The mercenaries, just tangential, but speaking of mercenaries, the system works by having a pool available in each in a number of regions. So a good example of this is Rohan, for example. So the pool of available units in Rohan is all of the regions combined. So if, for example, you can get 1 Rohirrim unit every 5 turns, that is 1 unit every 5 turns for all the regions. So if I train it in Ginyard, then it'll be 5 more turns before I can get it in Edoras. If I train it then in Edoras, it's 5 more turns before I can get it in Onodrith. You understand what I mean? It's a collective pool. So it isn't 1 per region, it's 1 per group of regions. So watch out for that. It does make the mercenaries not wildly available. But the Beacon of Hope units may not be as available as they possibly were before, given that it's now a collective pool. They replenish very quickly, though, so you're not going to be waiting for ages. I think they replenish in the sort of 10 turnish mark, which is standard for most unit recruitment. But your own units are now far more readily available. So this is the last point we'll talk before we discuss difficulty and head to the units. The Northern Dúnedain system of recruiting their own units in their own heartlands does continue. So if we go to their encampment, the Dúnedain War Camp gives us all of our starting Dúnedain units. Dúnedain Barracks gives us some of the later game units. And then finally the Dúnedain Royal Barracks gives us even more units again. And those 3 barracks buildings will give you your units in your heartland, as they did before, of course. So you get Cardland units in Cardland, you get Arthedain units in Arthedain, you get the normal Dúnedain units in all of Old Arnor. But now you are able to train Dúnedain units in every region across the globe. But in the 3rd tier, they require a much higher culture requirement. Oh, I can't show you because it's a different building, actually. We'd need to be in a different region, unfortunately, so I can't show you. That's annoying. Yes, I can. Hold on, everyone. I'll cheat move and take a region and then show you what I'm talking about. So here we are as an example. I've taken the region of Dorthalu over here in Rovanion, and you'll note that I can build the Dúnedain War Camp, which is the same building that we could get in our own heartland, because the buildings are now shared. And that will give me local militia and local archers, a unit that many of you will be familiar with, and you'll see in just a moment on the second half. But if we go into the building tier, there are now 2 tiers of the Dúnedain Barracks, the second being the Royal, which gives me local militia, local archers, Swan infantry, Swan horsemen, which we've also discussed. And then you will see we can then get all of our Dúnedain units. So there's the Cardellani, there's the Arthedain, there's the Dúnedain. But their culture requirements are way up, 85, 75, 70%. So you can get all of your Dúnedain units everywhere now, but they just take a lot longer to come. Because, like Dorthalu as an example, has 3% Dúnedain. You're going to be a long time before you can actually train anything there. So it takes a long time to get your Dúnedain units, but you can now get them everywhere. That's a change that has been made for version 4.5. So the beacon system is no longer as pertinent, as you can now use your own troops, but instead it just allows you to add a touch of flavour as you free the world as you make your way south on what is your long journey to fulfill your victory conditions of defeating Mordor, Isengard, and Angmar. So your victory conditions are very similar to Imladris, in that you're here to destroy everything evil in the world. You have to kill Saruman and you have to kill Mordor, but unlike the elves who aren't as bothered with their heartlands, they're here to stop Sauron and then they're buggering off. You are in it for the long haul, so you also need to defeat Angmar to stop them threatening your newly refounded land in the north. So there we are. I think that's everything covered for the Dúnedain's recruitment and whatnot. I suppose, just to mention, of course, as you saw there, all of the Dúnedain troops come from the same barracks building. So you don't have an archery range or stables, you have the barracks, and then you have the various tiers of the barracks, and that is it. Everything comes from that building. So your recruitment is quite nicely streamlined. And then we come on to the difficulty then, just before we pass over. I fully accept that my Dol Amroth difficulty rating was wrong, and I should have given them a 4 or a 5, probably a 5. If we are able to retcon that and change it to a 5, then I feel confident and no shame in admitting Dol Amroth, which is the other faction, the Northern Dúnedain, are a 4. Definitely a 4 in my opinion. You start with very few regions, very few troops, and very bloodthirsty enemies. Moria really will come for you. The spam that they are able to send, it's not unstoppable and it's not a complete nuisance, and your troops do massively outclass them. But you need to put the nail in their coffin quickly in order to shut them down. They will be busy with Khazad-dûm East, so Khazad-dûm will always make them watch their back. They don't ever want to empty troops out of West because lest Khazad-dûm actually take it. So if you can get in there and sort of shut them down early doors, for example, Zag-Kala's a good one to take because that's a key recruitment location, or indeed if you can just mop up Osnithil and Anon and Arod very early, then you really put a clamp around Moria and you would be able to shut them down. Rushing them is advised, because you will also have to deal with Angmar. You can't rush Angmar, for no matter what you try, you will not be able to rush them. In the early game, they have no enemies. It takes a long time for the dwarves of Ered Luin to get going, so Ered Luin won't threaten them. The elves of Mithlond never really even leave Imladris and that region anyway. Bree will have their hands busy with Dunland, who they start at war with, so Bree will go south. So it's you versus Angmar for a long time, and you just simply will not be able to rush them. They get troops, their troops train faster than yours, and they, to be honest, they are actually quite a challenge in the early game now that they've been changed over to be a human nation. And Moria is just that thorn in your side that I'd recommend trying to shut down quickly. But I've said all of this as if it's a doddle. It isn't. I would struggle with the Northern Dúnedain, I have no doubt, and I'm sure many of you will as well. Do also be alert to the fact that Dunland will likely go to war with you as well. They will be crossing the Gwathlo straight away. They get Tharbad at turn 2, so they're going to be coming up into the Cardlan area. So you've got to watch out for them, as you will almost certainly be taking Tirthuin and Keloniak and holding the Bruinen. And so at that point, you've got Moria coming at you constantly and relentlessly, and then you've given Dunland enough time to start creeping in as well. And the more time you give Angmar, the harder it will be. Because even though you may be able to defend at Dead Man's Dyke, for example, the dwarves do take a long time to get motivated, and in version 4.5, there is now the risk the dwarves may accept the Rings of Sauron and abandon and break all of their wars and allegiances. And at that point, you may then have someone who was a firm ally may suddenly now be sitting doing nothing and turtling whilst you've got to take on the might of Angmar. So it is a challenging campaign. The other reason it's a challenging campaign is because your troops train, the replenishment on your troops is very slow. The Dúnedain Rangers there, 34 turns until they're next available, 16 turns until the Wardens are next available. It is incredibly slow recruitment. Now, partially that's because you're in the first tier of the barracks. You need to get to the second tier to get them, to get your units trained out much quicker. But of course you can't get that till you have a village, so you need to rely on things like the beacon system from Bree. If you can get them from Dunland as well and pop them up, it's a bit of a stretch, but you may be able to. But the Dúnedain campaign is designed to be hard. It's designed not to be punishing and horrible and make you want to rage quit, but it will be a challenge. But it is mostly just Moria. If you can shut down Moria early, you'll be alright, because then you can focus on Angmar unimpeded, and Bree will likely keep Dunland busy long enough. You can also try and get Enid Wythe on side. If you ally with them, you might get them into the war against Dunland, which will take Dunland out of the game completely. So with some clever diplomacy and some finagling and finangling, you may be able to do it. But don't expect Imladris to help you in the fight with Moria at all. They simply won't. The Anduin will help you, so it might be an idea to try and ally with them, and also try and send them money if you have any excess. But money may be something that is hard to come by for you as the Dúnedain. So there we are, I'd say it's a 4. And now we'll jump over finally and look at your roster. Now I'm not going to show you the beacon units, I'm only going to show you the Dúnedain roster. Welcome then to the battle map for the Northern Dúnedain, and a quick overview shows you that you're a very rounded army. There's a lot of cavalry options, there's a lot of archer options, and there's a lot of infantry options. So you have a good, solid roster. Generally speaking, the Barracks event comes in with that large gap down the middle, but there are units on either side that don't obey that rule. So your units are fairly flexible in where they come and when they're available. And of course, remember, in the next version, there won't be a Barracks event, so it doesn't matter anyway. Now, the Dúnedain do have an equivalent of trash tier, but it's not trash, is it? It's militia. So you do get 2 militia units, the local militia. They are only available outside of the Dúnedain regions because they are recruited from the local populace, hence the name. They are not Dúnedain humans. They are just normal humans, middlemen if you will, equipped in Dúnedain garb. They have a 12 defense though, but their attack is 3. Very poor indeed. So they defend relatively well, courtesy of the gifts from the Dúnedain and the training of the Dúnedain, but their attack is still relatively poor because they don't have the Dúnedain inherent skill. So only a poor charge of 2, a poor attack of 3. They only cost 630, so their upkeep's likely to be about 300. They are there really for garrison duty to ensure your towns don't rebel, and they're a quick and cheaply and easily available unit to throw against the enemy to try and save the lives of your more important Dúnedain. That is the point of them. They're also supported by local archers, who any archer with a 3 missile attack is always at least actually useful. So that one is quite a useful unit. The local archer will do well, particularly for its very cheap cost and relatively good missile stat for its tier. It has an 8 total defense as well, so it's not totally useless, but again only a 3 melee attack. Now also, there wasn't enough room to show you, but the Lumbermen and the Woodland Hunters from the Bree overview are available to the Dúnedain as well. You get the same woodland building. So your main sort of militia tier across the whole world is local militia, local archers, and then woodland hunters and lumbermen as well. So there are those 4 units that you can train pretty much everywhere, except these 2 you can't get in Arnor Regions. But there wasn't enough room to show you the lumbermen or the woodland hunters, but you can see them on the Bree overview. So turning then to your first actual dedicated tier, these units are every other unit that I'm going to show you is classed as a Dúnedain unit, apart from there's 2 more to cover, but everything else is a Dúnedain unit and will only train easily and readily in the Dúnedain regions, so the Arnor regions, Arthedain, Cardlan and Rudau. And we'll start with the unit that isn't no, we won't, because it's an archer, actually. We'll start with the melee, because that's what we always do. So Dúnedain Wardens are one of the first Dúnedain units that you're going to get. They are a hide anywhere, spear and shield unit. They have a 6 attack, a 16 defense, and a 3 charge. So they are quite good spearmen. They're relatively costly at 850 for a unit that comes in your second tier. So their overall upkeep is likely to be about 400 coins. They, as I say, can hide anywhere, so that's a nice little ambush feature of them as well. Supporting them in this melee tier are the Cardlan Sentinels, who I've put in the wrong place because they're also archers, so we need to move them over there. Sorry, I thought they were javelins, I don't know why. Completely misguided placement. Other supporting unit in this tier is Arthedain Footmen, a unit I've already mentioned because they are your first armor-piercing unit. So the Arthedain Footmen have an attack of 5, which isn't fantastic, but a defense of 13, which is much better than most early tier armor-piercing units. They're effective against armor, as I say. They require an Arthedain region only, though, so they will only come from Arthedain. And all you need to do is look at a map to work out where Arthedain is, and it's in the northwest of the Arnor regions. Good morale response. No movement speed bonus for the Dúnedain. They're fast as they're just stock human speed. But the good morale is relatively. The Dúnedain morale is relatively high at each tier throughout. So the only melee units that you get are those 2, and then we turn to the archers. So as I say, I've already covered them a bit. I put them in the wrong place. I am sorry. I don't know why I thought they had javelins. They're a merging of two previous units into one. But Cardalan Sentinels are a good unit, very good unit in the early tier, because their missile attack is 4, which is very useful. The total defense is 13, which is kind of like Militia tier, but their melee attack is 8. So they're very good early tier archers, but they're also very good early tier warriors. They have a sword and a shield when they've finished with their bows. So they're a jack of all trades. They're one of those rare archer units that has been designed to be both an archer and a dedicated sword unit. So you do want to try and get Cardalan Sentinels. They'll make a big difference. But your dedicated archers come, we'll deal with the Dúnedain first. The Dúnedain Rangers are one of your key and most common archer units that you'll use throughout. They can hide anywhere again. They have a melee of 7, a missile of 7, which is fantastic. They're rangers, of course, so their range is 220 meters. Their accuracy is very high. 32 missiles. They are slightly faster than other human units, or any other foot unit, sorry. And their defense is 12. So the Cardalan Sentinels are better melee archers, but the Dúnedain Rangers, the Cardalan Sentinels only have 170 meter range, average accuracy and 24 missiles. But the Dúnedain Rangers are excellent archers and will be your key and chief archer unit for much of the early game. They are really, really important to your survival and success. But again, those are all Dúnedain units. Then we come to the Swan. So these, like the local archers, they are not available in your Dúnedain units. And these are people taken from the local populace that have sworn to the cause of the Dúnedain, hence the name Sworn Infantry and Sworn Cavalry. They've been trained better, given better equipment, and they of course are outfitted in the garb of what will be the Reunited Kingdom or Old Arnor. They have not got the finest of stats there, remember, they're still not Dúnedain. They are middlemen trained by Dúnedain. So their defense of 15 is better, of course. But their melee is only 6, which is worse than the Sentinels and the Dúnedain Rangers together. And their missile is only 5, which is slightly better than the Sentinels, of course, but worse than the Rangers. So they're a sort of mismatch. They come somewhere in the middle, having their melee is just a little worse, of course. But their defense and their missile is better than the Sentinels, but not as good as the Rangers, etc, etc. They are still a very good unit, particularly one that you can train in the earlier tiers. But remember, you can't get them in your heartlands. They are only available from the local populace of non-Dúnedain regions, because they are not Dúnedain men. That is why you can't get them. And they are accompanied on the field of battle by the Sworn Horsemen, the only other unit you can get everywhere readily available outside of Arnor, Sworn Horsemen. 5 attack, 8 charge, and a 16 total defense. Good morale response. They're a reasonably good sort of entry-level cavalry unit, but they're not fantastic. But they will at least fill that gap of early-tier cavalry. But you will most likely be looking at the beacon for your cavalry units, because nations like Rohan will give you a lot of cavalry. Even the Anduin gives you a fair bit of cavalry. Of course, Enedwaith and Dunland don't give you any cavalry, and Dunland gives you Dunlanding horsemen, so you get some trash cavalry from Dunland. But it's Rohan really that you want to turn to if you want good early tier cavalry. But you've got late tier cavalry covered, so don't worry about that. The other cavalry in this second tier, Cardalan Riders. Now they also, of course, come from the Cardalan region. So that's the southern of the 3 of the Arnorian splinter nations. Their morale is good. Their morale response is only average, though. That's not as good. Their attack is 5, their charge is 5, and their defense is 12. So you'll note they are worse in all stats, bar their attack, than the Sworn Horsemen. The Horsemen, it doesn't say their secondary attack. Maybe they don't have one, actually. Maybe they both use spears throughout. That would make sense. Or it's a bug. In any event, the Cardalan Riders are not as good as the Sworn Horsemen. Because, chiefly, I can't really mention that because we're going to have one of the best cavalry units in the moment. But they're not as good as Sworn Cavalry, Sworn Horsemen. So watch out for that. But they're good early tier, 805, 400 gold coin upkeep. It's not too bad. And lastly, the Dúnedain Scouts, who are not the bodyguard of Elladan and Elrohir. The Dúnedain bodyguard is the bodyguard of Elladan and Elrohir, that unit all the way over there. But we're not on them at the moment. But anyway, Dúnedain Scouts are a cavalry archer unit. They can form a shooting circle, which is useful. Missile is 5, total defense is 8, which is terrible, and melee is 5, which is not too bad. But they're awful as charge cavalry, and they are useful as ranged cavalry. But once they finish with their arrows, they're not going to help you very much at all. 28 missiles, that means they'll be firing for a while. 120 meter range, they've got to get close to shoot, but their accuracy is high. So they will be able to do good damage with their missiles. In fact, very good damage. But do watch out for them getting shot back at, because their defense against arrow fire is only 5, which is really low. So they don't like being shot. Most people don't like being shot, but they particularly suffer if they get shot. Right, and then we come to your sort of dedicated mainstream. Again, we're in the Dúnedain, and we'll start with a unit that most people know because it's been here since Third Age, the Dúnedain Blade Masters. They are a shock infantry unit that is not effective against armour, unfortunately, but with a high attack of 15 and a total offence of 15, they're a really good shock infantry unit, really good. But they're very expensive. Good morale, or very good morale, sorry, good morale response, 100% movement speed, so no bonus on the speed. But still a fantastic strike infantry. And standing with them holding the line whilst they charge in the flanks are the newly created Dúnedain Armsmen. And they are a sword and shield dedicated late Dúnedain unit with an attack of 9, which is damned good, and a defense of 20. So they will hold the line wonderfully whilst the shock charge in the sides. And they'll kill some things themselves. Don't you worry about that with their 9 attack. But otherwise they're just standard sword and shield units. Very good morale response. And lastly, a very AOR unit. This one is only available in Tharbad, and they are the Tharbad Royal Guard. I've popped them in this video, even though Gondor and Dol Amroth get them, because you're the one that's most likely to train them. They upgrade to look like the plate armour, which is always very nice, but they lower tier it looks like this with the Arnorian tabard and whatever it is. Their attack is 6, but they're a pike unit, of course. That's closer to sort of 20, 21, so ridiculously high. Total defense is 17 as well, so they will defend really well. Even if the enemy is lucky enough to break through, they won't be getting very many kills against these. They have good morale, though, so not fantastic. Their morale response is good, and of course they get bonus against mounts because they're pikes. But they only come from Tharbad, which is now only one region, and they require the rebuilt bridge as well. So they're quite restricted, to be honest. But they're really good pikes, so do try and use them if you can. And lastly, supporting them then, your final proper archer unit, the Dúnedain Steel Bowmen. This is one of the best archers because they are armour piercing. Effective against armour with their bows. They frighten enemy infantry. And they're your unit that can place stakes as well. So if you ever need some stakes, you've got to come to your Steel Bowmen. Their melee attack is 14 and their missile is 7. So they're like Dúnedain Rangers that have taken the armor stats of the Dúnedain Armsmen and coupled it with the attack stats of the Blade Masters. They're really good. They are genuinely like the Armsmen, Blade Masters and Rangers smashed into one fantastic unit. And so trying to use them as often as you can is very useful. Their steel arrows are armor piercing, as I've mentioned. They have excellent morale. They don't get a speed bonus, and their range isn't quite as good, only 190. Their accuracy, though, is high, and they only get 24 missiles. They require a major Númenórean town, so they'll come from places like Annúminas, Fornost, Tharbad, Isengard, Helm's Deep, possibly? No, Helm's Deep. Yeah, Helm's Deep was built by the Númenóreans. Maybe Helm's Deep. Minas Tirith, certainly. Dol Amroth, Minas Ithil, both Osgiliaths. They are predominantly focused in the south of the map, but they're a really, really good unit. But they're very, very costly, so watch out for that. But it's an interesting unit it's an interesting coupling because they are essentially armor-piercing archers that then turn into a strike infantry unit when they've finished. So that's a rare mix. Which is why they're favoured. Lots of people like them. And of course, Halbarad has them as his bodyguard, so you get a unit of them to play with from the start of the game. And lastly then, on this tier, the Dúnedain Cavalry. Now you can train Dúnedain Cavalry straight away from Fennes Drönen, I believe. They come in relatively early. I don't actually think they come in after the Barracks event. Anyway, that doesn't matter. In terms of tier, this is where they come in. Their attack is 8, their charge is 10, and their defense, which is key in cavalry, is 20. Secondary attack of 7, so not too much lower. They are very good cavalry and will help you immensely in charging down the hordes of Moria, whom they will shred through like butter. Of course, having a high defensive cavalry is absolutely paramount because cavalry have a huge hitbox, so they get hit by lots of enemies. So cavalry can have a fantastic attack and charge, but that means sod all if its defense is only 2. Because they will die on their own charge. Whereas these guys have a nice high defense, so they will survive long enough to pull out and charge in again. And that leaves us then with your only 2 elite units, and they are from Arthedain itself, the holdout realm of Arnor, starting with the Knights. Arthedain Knights inspire your troops and frighten the enemy troops. They have an attack of 12, which is very good for a sword and shield unit, because they also have a 30 total defense. They are the best unit you have at holding the line, bar possibly the Tharbad pikemen. They're very, very defensive. They have excellent morale, and it is locked, so they will fight to the death, but they don't have any movement speed bonus. And their morale response is good, so they won't charge without orders, but they will suffer from shock slightly worse than a bloodthirsty savage would. And lastly, they are supported by a unit that I think came second or third in the best cavalry unit in the game when I did a top 10 on them, the Dine Royal Guard. This is also Gandalf. Oh, I didn't talk about Gandalf, did I? Completely missed Gandalf. Oh, I knew I'd missed something. Oh, bugger. I even said to myself, have I missed anything? Can I start now? And I've missed Gandalf completely. But anyway, Dine Royal Guard are Gandalf the White's bodyguard, and also a trainable unit. They frighten enemy infantry, they inspire your troops, and they have excellent morale, which is also locked. Actually, I'm going to edit it and put Gandalf back in, so this isn't going to make sense. But just all rest assured, I forgot to talk about Gandalf. Their movement speed is slightly slower than other cavalry though, because their horses are barded, and they have these heavy and weighted armor and caparisons, so they will be slower. Their secondary attack is 9, but their main is 10, their charge is 13, but crucially their total offense is 30. They also have a slightly higher mass than most other horses, which you can't see here, but rest assured that a horse that is barded, generally speaking, has a higher mass than other cavalry, which means they're better at charging, because the mass pushes them into the enemy unit more. They're a really, really good cavalry, but they're very expensive. 1,500, their upkeep is likely between 700 and 800 coins, which is a lot. So watch out for that. Gandalf the Grey's bodyguard, whilst I'm on it, is Dúnedain Cavalry, this unit here. So the grey one comes with cavalry, and the white one comes with Royal Guard. And lastly then, your two bodyguard units, of course, we'll start with Aragorn's because it's only for Aragorn, and they are the Grey Company. So as I say, they are sword and shield wielding warriors, although some of them do have axes and a dagger for a secondary, but they do get a shield stat. So even though some of them will defend with a sword, they do still count as having shields. They inspire your forces and they frighten enemy forces. They're good at hiding in woods. They have a 16 total attack, which is really good for a sword and shield unit, and a 34 total defense with an 8 charge. They cannot be staggered either, and in a unit of 47, although with Aragorn in command of them, they'll have probably about 60-ish men, I would have thought. Not being able to be staggered is fantastic. They have unwavering morale that is locked, and they are 15% faster than any other infantry units. They are really, really good. They also get a bonus against wargs as well, so they will slay any wargs that come at them. They are just fantastic foot soldiers. That cannot be emphasized any harder than it already is. But do note that custom generals such as Sauron and Aragorn never appear in custom battle, because custom battles don't have generals, they only ever have captains. So Aragorn isn't here, but this is his company. That's particularly pertinent for Sauron because the unit doesn't actually have Sauron. So lots of people always ask, why is Sauron's unit just a standard human infantry? But anyway, and lastly, the Dúnedain Bodyguard. One of the best bodyguard units in the game because they're effective against armor with their bows and their melee weapons. Their secondary weapon is a two-handed axe. They are fearsome warriors and very, very useful as bodyguards. I'm sure they still have a two-handed axe. It looks like they might have swords. We may see later on, but I'm fairly certain they're AP with both weapons. They're very high accuracy, 240 meter range, 34 missiles, very good morale that is locked. 105% movement speed bonus, so they move 5% faster than everyone else. They have a 7 melee, an 8 missiles, so they have the highest arrow damage of any of your units, just in terms of raw stats. And they have a 19 total defense, so they'll survive quite well, quite nicely as well. Do note though, because their morale is locked, it can make it harder for you. Some of your generals might fight to the death, where you actually would rather they stood and fought, or ran away, sorry. So there we are, that's the Dúnedain roster. This has been a bloomin' lengthy video. We're going to now hand over to the AI and watch them ably defend against who we are up against next week. Now we're keeping it in Eriador for next week, and this time I haven't forgotten to actually guess who they are. So there's a lot of black going on over there that you can see. The sprites are rather dark, except for these cavalry units over here, where they seem to be there's a lot of colour, a lot of white colour coming in on the sides there, so that's something to note. And as we come around the back, standard, they always chuck siege in. I can never be bothered to turn it off. The banner seems to be a sort of icy blue as well. And of course, because it is the remnants of Angmar that we are up against next time. Ably showing off the Ruidour units, which become available to you if you defeat Angmar. The Ruidour units are very, very useful for the Dúnedain because they do plug quite a few little gaps, and they're very useful to get on board. But it can be quite a challenge taking on Angmar, as we shall see next week, because Angmar are much better than they were before, and they have so much more character than they did when they were just a knockoff clone of the Misty Mountains. Whereas now they have a much better personality. And their units look really cool. So that's always good as well. Some of their North Guard, some of their elite units. All the lines are about to meet. Witch Knights charging straight into the Wardens, who push back, which is very nice to see. The Huskarls have chosen to go up against the Arthurdine Knights, which is a good matchup for the Huskarls, actually, because they're one of the best strike infantry, so they'll be doing a lot of damage. Did the Dúnedain Bodyguard get involved? Can we see if they've got two-handed axes? Where are the Dúnedain Bodyguard? I did actually make them my general's unit, so we should hopefully see a star on the map somewhere. I'm not seeing a star. I can see their star, but not ours. Are they not in here? It looks like they might be in here. No, I just can't see them. Unless they've already been killed. But they've got to be in this just sort of clumping somewhere. I knew I should have followed them. That was so disappointing. Oh, we've got units routing. Why am I doing this? I can just double click and go over to them. Oh, they're over here and they're getting slaughtered. But are you using an axe? Where are you? No. Oh, he's the banner carrier anyway. He's the actual captain. Oh, damn, we got there too late. Sorry, everyone. But anyway, that is going to conclude this episode. So I do hope you've learned something about the Northern Dúnedain, and that you're looking forward to playing as them as we move forward. But of course, next week it will be Angmar, and that's all there is. So thank you very much for watching, and until we speak again, Navair Naden Pedamad Melonin, and farewell.